Well, greetings everyone. It's 4 p.m. Eastern Time. It's time to begin our webinar episode for the day. So welcome to our webinar series on airspace for UAS operators. My name is Kevin Morris and I'm an aviation safety inspector with the Federal Aviation Administration and also a subject matter expert on UAS operations. Our webinar today is divided into two segments. The first portion will be a presentation on knowing what airspace is above you, and the second portion will provide an opportunity to have your questions answered live on the air. I'm joined by a team of FAA subject matter experts who are ready to take your questions throughout the webinar today. You can submit your questions at any time using the question and answer feature of Adobe Connect. And if we're unable to get to your question during the webinar today, don't worry. We will be answering all questions asked and posting them to our website in the coming weeks. So let's begin. Today we're going to talk about airspace, and in particular, the airspace you're flying in, how that airspace is depicted on charts, and the operational requirements you'll need to fly in that airspace. Knowing your exact geographical location is the first critical step in knowing what airspace you're about to operate in. Typically speaking, we identify our location referencing an airport code or a street address or latitude and longitude coordinates, otherwise known as lat-long. Since most drone flights utilize GPS signals, maybe the easiest way for you to determine your position is with lat-long. Regardless of which method you use, your location will ultimately determine the requirements you'll need to be aware of before you begin your flight. You'll need to know where you're starting from, the route that you're going to fly, and where you're landing. Once you've determined your starting position, route of flight, and endpoint, you'll need to see where those locations are in the National Airspace System. By referencing FAA aeronautical charts or UAS facility maps, you'll be able to identify where those locations are and determine what airspace you will be operating in. In addition to FAA provided charts and facility maps, there are a number of third-party vendors that utilize the FAA's data and present the information in a manner which may be more preferable to you. Whichever chart information you use, remember this: as a drone operator, it is your responsibility to always be aware of the airspace you're flying in. Both controlled and uncontrolled airspace are depicted on FAA aeronautical charts. As a drone operator, you need to be familiar with these charts as they provide all the information you will need to identify what class of airspace you plan to operate in and if you'll need an FAA authorization to fly. Classes of airspace are differentiated by a variety of colors. For example, the blue markings here denote Class Bravo airspace. In addition to colors, different markings are used to help delineate the airspace. Solid lines, dashed lines, and shaded zones all designate different airspace important to drone operators. So let's take a look at how different airspace is depicted. Aeronautical charts clearly display the lateral and vertical boundaries of Class Bravo, depicted here by solid blue lines, and Class Charlie airspace, depicted by solid magenta lines. They also define the boundaries of Class Delta using dashed blue lines, and Surface Class Echo airspace shown with dashed magenta lines. All of the airspace classes you see on the screen are known as controlled airspace. This means that to operate a drone in any of these classes, you're required to have an authorization from the FAA before you fly. So to successfully apply for and receive an authorization, you must correctly identify what airspace you plan to fly in and its altitudes and how they are segmented for UAS operations. In addition to aeronautical charts, the FAA publishes UAS facility maps detailing over 450 different airspace locations to aid drone pilots. UAS facility maps show areas and altitudes around airports in controlled airspace where drone pilots can receive an authorization to fly at or below the maximum altitude depicted. The maps are color-coded and show where the Low Altitude Authorization and Notification Capability, or LAANC, is available, and where you'll need to use the Dronezone web portal when submitting your airspace authorization request. Essentially, once you've determined your geographic location, you can use the facility maps to confirm where you'll need an authorization, the altitudes allowed, and how you can apply for it. UAS facility maps are often referred to as grid maps, as they're laid out in grids. The grids and maximum altitudes are determined by the individual air traffic facility in a given area and are designed to assist pilots with their flight planning. Now, planning is the key word here. The grids are not pre-approved authorizations. However, they can help you decide on how best to apply for your airspace authorization. For example, through LANCE, you can receive a near real-time approval if requesting to fly at or below the maximum altitude shown on the grid. In addition to map information, LANCE UAS service suppliers also use multiple data streams such as airspace restrictions, notices to airmen, and temporary flight restrictions when processing authorization requests. We will have 2 webinars dedicated to LANCE and the UAS facility maps later in our series. There are also video resources available on the FAA website and the Eventbrite registration page. Well, now that you understand how to identify where you are and what airspace you're going to operate in, let's take a look at a fairly typical drone flight near Lawrence, Kansas. On this particular flight, you want to take some aerial imagery of the Kansas River. As part of your pre-flight planning, you should always review your flight path against the aeronautical chart and check for any airspace restrictions. So you've noted your starting and ending location and planned route of flight. Based on your pre-flight planning, you notice that you'll be operating in a couple of different classes of airspace. While your planned flight starts in Class Gulf airspace, the route of flight actually takes it within Surface Class Echo airspace. Operations within Surface Class Echo airspace designated for an airport require an authorization from the FAA. Therefore, you should reference the UAS facility map. When viewing the UAS facility map, it's recommended you check the altitudes and grid color for a given location. This will tell you what the maximum altitude limit above ground level, or AGL, is, and if you can use LANCE or Dronezone when submitting your authorization request. In this example, you can see one of the grids has a maximum operating altitude of 100 feet AGL, and that the grid map is green. This means that you can request an airspace authorization through an FAA-approved LANCE UAS service supplier to fly at or below 100 feet. And that's it. You just planned a flight. As you can see, it's not a complicated process, and you were successful because you knew your geographical location, you recognized the airspace you wanted to fly in, and you identified the requirements for that airspace. You were then able to fly your mission successfully and comply with FAA regulations. So thanks for joining us today on our short presentation on knowing what airspace is above you. For our complete webinar schedule, please visit our website at faa.gov/go/drone webinar. And we always have additional UAS resources available on our website at faa.gov/UAS. And you can always watch our previous webinars on our official FAA YouTube channel, youtube.com/user/FAA news. Our next episode is titled, What is Class Echo Airspace and How to Operate in It? That will be aired live on May 23rd at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. So that wraps up our presentation portion today, but please stick around as we're going to take just a short break and then come back to answer some of your questions live on the air. Don't forget, during this short break, you can continue to submit your questions through the question and answer feature to our FAA subject matter experts. So please stick around. We'll be back real shortly here to answer your questions on the air. Okay, we're back. One of the benefits of having a short presentation portion is that the remainder of our half an hour today can be dedicated specifically to answering your questions. So I hope you folks have been submitting your questions to our FAA subject matter experts during the first portion. Please continue to submit those questions as we go through our live Q&A portion as well here. They will be here for the rest of the time answering those questions. So even if you don't want to submit a question to have read live on the air, and I promise I won't read your names, I'll just read the question, you can certainly submit that question and they will get to it as quickly as they can. Due to sometimes the overwhelming number of questions, you may not see your question answered right away. Trust me, we have your question, and we, like I said at the beginning, we will answer that question and post it to our website here in the coming weeks. So let's get started here. We've already got some questions rolling in, and I'll just take one of the first one here. It says, the question is, where can I find current aeronautical charts? Aeronautical charts, the most current versions are made available for free on the FAA website. We've created a Go link to that website because it can be a little bit convoluted with a lot of letters and numbers after that. But the easiest way to get there is faa.gov/go/VFR charts. And we can put that answer into the Q&A so you'll have the actual website as well later on. But that's where you can go to find the most current FAA charts. We have a variety of charts there available to you that cover the entire United States. And like I said earlier, all those charts are free. So thank you. That was a very good question. I appreciate that. Another question coming in. What do we do if we want to use Lance or Dronezone? Call the airport, question mark. So Lance and Dronezone are the two ways that you can receive your airspace authorization to fly in controlled airspace. It's not recommended that you contact the airport. In fact, that's the whole point of us developing Lance and Dronezone. Lance has been rolled out over the past couple years, and we're adding more and more airports into it as time goes on. But if you look at the U.S. Facility Map, and it's a green map, and that means Lance is available for that area, you can use Lance via your mobile device through any one of our UAS service suppliers to submit your authorization request. And like in the example I had on in the presentation portion, if you're looking at that grid map and it says the maximum altitude where you want to fly is 200 feet, and you submit an authorization request at or below 200 feet within that area, you should receive a near real-time response back authorizing you to fly. Now, if you happen to be flying in an area that's not serviced by Lance yet, or you want to fly in an area maybe that's got a zero grid, you can use the Dronezone web portal. Now, that portal is not going to operate in near real time. That portal is going to take a fair amount of time longer, relatively speaking, to a Lance authorization. So if you need to get access to an airspace where you need to use the Dronezone web portal, I suggest submitting that authorization request as far in advance as possible. So thank you. That's a very good question. Next question that comes in is sort of related to that is, how long does it take for an airspace authorization to be approved? And it's kind of the tale of two stories. It really, again, depends on where you're flying and if that airspace has been linked up to Lance, or if it's still the request still has to go through the Dronezone portal. If it's linked up to Lance and if you're flying at or below those grid map altitudes, it'll come back in near real time. Many people I've talked to in the industry that are using Lance are very, very happy with the way it's working. And again, like I mentioned, we're bringing more airports on board here as time goes forward. Let me find here the next question. See, this one's a little bit longer. Let me see if I can get through it here. I live within 5 miles of a small aerodrome. They have no tower and no published phone number. I have driven to the site, but it is unmanned. How do I obtain authorization to fly within the 5-mile radius? I'm glad you asked this question because it sort of conflates two different types of operations here. When we're talking about authorizations, that's specific to airspace. Although you could easily say that the airspace is connected to the airport, and while that's absolutely true, airspace authorizations are for the airspace. So unless that aerodrome or airport or heliport or whatever field you're looking to fly around, unless that is falling underneath a class Bravo, Charlie, Delta, or surface echo designated for an airport, an authorization would not be required to fly in that airspace. For example, if we have most of our airports in the United States are located within class Gulf airspace, and class Gulf airspace does not require an air traffic authorization prior to operating. So the other thing mentioned there was a 5-mile radius, and that was part of the previous public law on recreational operators, which many of you probably know is being retooled right now with the Reauthorization Act that was passed in October. So for the latest guidance on recreational operations, please check our website at faa.gov/UAS. So good question. Thank you for that. A lot of questions going in here. Is there a specific web address for the UAS facility maps? Another great question. Yes, there is. And off the top of my head, I don't recall exactly what that is, but we can post that website link into the question. Let me see if I can find it in some of my resources here. Yes, I can. I'll give it to you now, but we're going to post it into the Q&A feature so that you have it for sure. It's HTTPS, and it'll be a uas-faa.opendata.arcgis.com. And like I said, that's a bit of a mouthful. So we'll make sure to post that website into the Q&A pod, and that way you can easily click on that. But that website is updated in real time. I believe the turn time on that is every 24 hours that the facility map website is updated. But that is also a website that is up and is free for anyone to use. So again, thank you for that question. Another question coming in, how do I access the documents that were available prior to the start of the webinar? Another great question. Those documents will be available on your screen again. They kind of disappear. We're a little bit limited with screen real estate when we start doing the webinar, and we want to give you, if you guys have attended this webinar before, you saw that the layout changed just a little bit. Based on your feedback, we tried to make the question and answer pod a little bit larger and a little bit taller vertically so that the questions wouldn't scroll so fast on you folks. And part of that is we lose some of the real estate to get that back on there. But have no fear, we will have those documents and the web links available when we wrap up. You'll be able to click on them and download them here once our presentation is over for today. So thank you for asking that. All right, questions are still coming in. This is really, really good stuff here. Are Lance and Drone Zones available, are Lance and Drone Zone available to recreational photographers? Great question. As many of you know, one of the one of the requirements that come up is for recreational flyers, you need airspace authorizations as part of the new process. We're working on getting that implemented. Currently, right now, we don't have Lance up and running to accept recreational flyer authorization requests. That is something that we are working on, absolutely. So right now, Lance is not available for recreational flyers, but you can submit through Dronezone as well. Again, the recreational flyer side of things is changing quite rapidly, and I would suggest that for the most latest and up-to-date information to visit our website at faa.gov/UAS. So thank you for that, photographer, for that question about the photographer. Another question, is Lance available through Before You Fly? No, the Lance is not going to be available through the Before You Fly app, which is under some re-imaging right now. It's still up and available to everyone to use, but we are working with Kitty Hawk to redesign that program. Lance is only available through our FAA-approved UAS service suppliers. And if you're looking for a list of UAS service suppliers, we do maintain that on our website. These are third-party vendors that manage the Lance program through our data servers. So you need to go to one of the UAS service suppliers to utilize Lance. So thank you for that. Question here, are heliports considered the same as airports in terms of controlled airspace? Kind of want to talk about, they're a little bit separate. The heliport or an airport is the actual surface area where helicopters take off and land, or where aircraft, there's runways and taxiways and things like that. Airspace is what is surrounding it, above it. And so when we talk about heliports, the simple answer to our heliports controlled airspace? They are if they're within controlled airspace. So I'll give you an example. A lot of times Class Bravo or Class Charlie airspace laterally extends out quite a ways, 6 miles, 5 miles away from the airport center. It's very easy to have either a standalone heliport or maybe one associated with a hospital within that 5 or 6 mile ring where Class Bravo airspace goes right down to the surface. And in that case, the heliport would be within controlled airspace, and you would need an authorization to fly around that heliport. It's always best, like we were talking earlier, check the aeronautical chart and check the UAS facility maps for where you want to fly. Know your geographical starting point and check those maps as to where you are. That will give you your best indication of whether you need an authorization or in what type of airspace you're going to be in. So thank you for that question. Another good one. Again, folks, just to remind you, if you do have questions that you want read on the air, simply type the word live in front of your question and they'll get it to me and we'll be able to tackle that question on the air. Somebody asked, can you explain before you fly? Sure, I'll give you the quick version of that. Before You Fly is an app that the FAA originally developed with a focus on the recreational flyer, the model aircraft flyer, a few years ago. It is a great app to help you understand where airports are, what different airspaces are around you, and if there are any temporary flight restrictions or other airspace restrictions in your area. It's a free app to download via, I believe it's on both Apple and Google stores. You can download that to your mobile device, and it will help you understand what's around you and what you may need to do to be compliant with some of the recreational rules. Just one caution, we are retooling that app, and as I mentioned a couple times already, the recreational world is changing quite rapidly right now. So make sure you check our website, faa.gov/UAS, for the most up-to-date information on recreational flying requirements. So that's a good question. Question coming in, you mentioned this earlier, but to be more specific, what is Dronezone and how is it accessed? Web only, or is it incorporated into a mobile app? Great question. Dronezone is a web-based portal, and I'm pretty sure I can find the address here, and it's not too difficult to say on this one. To access the Dronezone portal, it's www.faadronezone, all one word there, .faa.gov. And again, we'll post this in the Q&A so you'll have the actual link. But again, it's www.faadronezone.faa.gov. And that will get you to the Dronezone portal. And you can do a variety of things in Dronezone. We definitely talked about submitting airspace authorization requests, but that is also where you go to register your aircraft via recreation or under Part 107. It's also where Part 107 operators could submit a waiver request, for example, if they want to fly at night or if they want to fly beyond visual line of sight. So the Dronezone portal offers a lot of interaction between what you folks may need in the field to fly and what the FAA can provide you. So again, that information on there is usually pretty up to date, good stuff. I just want to touch on registration a little bit because I seem to see this time and time again. Make sure that when you're registering your UAS, you do it through our website, which is the Dronezone portal. Registration costs $5 and is valid for 3 years. You should not have to pay more than $5 to register your UAS and is valid for 3 years. And you can do all that on the Dronezone portal. So thanks for that question. That was another good one. Here's a great question. At a Class Delta airport with a Parttime Tower, what does the airspace become when the tower is closed? So a Class Delta airport is classified that way because at some point it has an operating control tower functioning at that field. Not every airport needs a 24-hour control tower operation. So many airports in the United States have part-time towers. And when I say part-time, they usually operate from somewhere around 6 a.m. to 10 o'clock at night local time. So when the tower is not operating, the Class Delta airspace is also not in effect. Now, in order to find out what happens to that airspace, you need to look at the FAA chart supplement. You can find that on our website in the same areas where you can find those VFR charts. But essentially what you're going to do is you're going to look up the airport in that chart supplement, and it will tell you not only at what time the tower is operational, but it'll tell you what happens to that airspace when the tower closes. Some Delta airspace just reverts to Class Golf. Some, actually quite a few, revert to Class Echo, Surface Class Echo, designated for an airport. So you really need to take a look at the individual airport, because there's not one blanket answer that I can give you here that tells you all Class Delta airport does this when the tower closes. So check the chart supplement, and that will tell you the information you need to know about that tower. That's a great question. Thank you for that. All right, we've got probably time for just a couple more questions here. Let me find one. This is actually more of a suggestion, but it's a great suggestion, and I want to echo that to everyone here. The suggestion is, don't forget about checking notices to airmen and times when Class E reverts to G. And that's a great point. And I would just emphasize that you should always be checking notices to airmen. You should always be aware of any flight restrictions in your area. Before you fly app or UAS service suppliers on their mobile apps all tie in that information. So they're usually a pretty darn good one-stop shop for all the airspace information you need before you go fly to check that information. But that's a great point. It doesn't matter if you're flying just out in Class Golf airspace or Class Echo surface. Always check NOTAMs and check for airspace restrictions before you fly, because believe me, you don't want to end up flying during a temporary flight restriction. That probably won't be a pleasant experience for you. So let's see if I get one more question up here. This actually comes up quite a bit where I live in the Midwest here. The question is, I operate in an area where aerial applicators, which is the official term for a crop duster, pass through going to and from agricultural fields, sometimes flying quite low. What is the best practice for flying when they are flying? Excellent question. Remember the number one rule, whether you're flying as a recreational flyer or you're flying under Part 107, is that if you're operating an unmanned aircraft, you must give way and not interfere with manned aircraft at all times. It is your responsibility to, frankly, get out of the way of any manned aircraft operating in the area. Now, this question brings up a point, because a lot of aircraft, helicopters, but in particular ag aircraft, crop dusters, do fly very low. Most of their entire flying life is below 400 feet AGL, above ground level. And so the question then, how do we avoid that? Well, I wish I could give you a magic answer to solve all the problems, but it really depends on your area. Some of my recommendations would be have some visual observers, and maybe have more than one. If you're operating in an area where you know that ag aircraft are transitioning back and forth at low altitudes when they're going out to spray fields and then coming back to put more product on, maybe station some visual observers around where you can have a chance that they can see them and they can notify you that, hey, there's an ag aircraft coming in, and it gives you the opportunity to deconflict and land before that even becomes a problem. So very specific to where you're flying, but this goes with not just ag aircraft, but helicopters or anything. Anytime you're in an area where you know there's an increased risk of having a manned aircraft in the same airspace that your drone would be, I would employ different techniques to mitigate that risk. Bring in different visual observers, maybe listen into an aviation frequency so you could hear an aircraft that might be self-announcing. But certainly do whatever you feel would be most appropriate to give you enough time as the remote pilot in command or as a recreational flyer to get out of the way of that aircraft that's flying by or coming inbound. So great questions. Unfortunately, we've run out of time here for today, but I'm encouraged by these questions you guys are sending in. All this stuff is really, really good, thoughtful questions. Remember, if we didn't get to your question during the webinar today, don't worry, we will answer all the questions submitted. And as soon as we can get those questions answered and then we go through a verification process, we do post them online to our website. So look for these questions to come online as part of the FAQ here, in the coming weeks. So I just want to say thank you for your attention again today. It was a pleasure looking at some of the questions you guys have. It's a very knowledgeable crowd. On behalf of the FAA, I'm Kevin Morris, reminding you to fly safe.